The morning light slipped through the old wooden shutters, painting faint golden streaks across the small room. Sam sat motionless on the edge of her bed, her trembling hands gripping a tiny white stick. Her breath caught as her eyes fixed on it. 2 faint pink lines slowly appeared. For a moment, the world went still. Her lips parted, but no words came out, only the sound of her heartbeat, heavy, uneven, echoing in her chest. "No, it can't be," she whispered, her voice breaking as tears blurred her vision. The pregnancy test fell from her hands and rolled onto the cold tile floor. Outside, the rooster crowed, and the faint laughter of children floated from a distant lane, the sound of life continuing, unaware that hers had just changed forever. Sam pressed her palms against her stomach, trembling. 1,000 thoughts crashed through her mind. She was a single mother already, working day and night to care for her small son, selling vegetables and handmade goods to survive. Every coin was counted carefully, every meal measured, and now, another child. Her thoughts drifted to Ly, the man whose shadow still lingered in her heart. He had been kind, warm, and gentle, a rare light in her dark world. But that light had vanished months ago, when misunderstanding and pride pulled them apart. Sam stood slowly, her legs weak, her face pale as snow. She could feel the wind slip through the thin cracks of her house, cold against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering into the emptiness, "What am I going to do now?" At that moment, fear ruled her heart, but deep inside, beneath the trembling and the tears, something faintly stirred, a fragile, quiet strength, a whisper of life and of hope. That night, Sam couldn't sleep. The small lamp beside her bed flickered, casting long shadows across the room. She lay awake, one hand resting gently on her stomach. The thought that a new life was growing inside her felt both miraculous and terrifying. Every sound in the quiet night seemed louder: the creak of the wooden floor, the distant barking of a dog, the rustling of the wind against the window. She turned her face toward the ceiling, eyes glistening. "What will happen to me? To my child?" she murmured, her voice trembling. Her mind wandered back to Ly, his smile, his voice, the warmth in his eyes. There had been moments when she felt he truly loved her, that their souls recognized each other beyond words. But then came the distance, the cold silences, the misunderstanding that broke everything apart. Would he even believe her now? Would he accept this child if it were his? Or would he turn away like others had, leaving her alone to face the storm once again? The thought of going through pregnancy without anyone by her side made her chest tighten. Memories of her first childbirth flooded back, the loneliness, the fear, the struggle. But this time, she wasn't that same fragile woman anymore. Life had hardened her, taught her to stand up even when her knees trembled. The next morning, she got up before dawn. The sky was still pale gray when she went out to the small garden behind her house. The earth was cool beneath her bare feet. She knelt down, touching the soft soil, whispering quietly as if speaking to the new life inside her. "No matter what happens, I'll protect you," she said, "even if I have to do it alone." And in that fragile promise, a new kind of strength was born, not from certainty, but from love. Days passed slowly, each one wrapped in quiet determination. Sam began to adjust to the reality of her pregnancy. Morning sickness came and went like the tide, and though her body weakened, her heart grew stronger. Still, the silence around her was heavy, too heavy. One afternoon, while she was washing vegetables by the stream near her small house, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning around, she froze. It was Ly. He looked almost the same, tall, calm, with that familiar air of quiet authority. But his eyes were tired, and something in them felt different. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The sound of the flowing water faded. "Sam," he said softly, his voice hesitant. "It's been a while." She didn't know what to say. The words tangled in her throat. "Yes," she finally whispered. "It's been long." He stepped closer, his gaze scanning her face, then lowering to her hands that trembled slightly. "You look pale, are you?" "All right." She forced a small smile. "I'm fine, just busy with work. But he knew something was wrong, he could sense it. The woman standing before him wasn't the same Sam he had known before. There was a fragile glow around her, a quiet sadness she couldn't hide. He wanted to ask to know what had happened since they parted, but fear held him back. Fear that the truth would hurt more than silence. "Sam," he said after a long pause, "I never stopped thinking about you." Her heart clenched. The words she had dreamed of hearing for months now only deepened her pain. She turned away, blinking back tears. "Please, Lee," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't say those words now. It's too late." He looked at her, confused and desperate. Too late? Why? But before she could answer, a tear slid down her cheek. She placed a hand gently over her stomach, an instinct she didn't even realize. Lee's eyes followed the motion. His heart stopped. "Sam, are you?" She didn't respond. The only sound between them was the soft murmur of the stream, carrying away everything she couldn't say. The next morning, frost covered the garden outside to Sam's small house. The cold winds swept through the valley, but inside, her heart burned with a storm of emotions she could no longer hide. All night, she had lain awake, thinking about Lee, about the look in his eyes when he noticed her hand resting on her stomach. There was no more hiding now. He deserved to know the truth. When the sound of his footsteps echoed outside again, she felt her breath catch. Lee stood at the doorway, his eyes searching hers with quiet urgency. "Sam," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "please tell me the truth. Is it my child?" For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The fire crackled softly between them, warming the air but doing nothing to melt the tension. "Yes," she finally said, her voice trembling. "It's yours." Lee's breath hitched. He took a step closer, his eyes wide, a mixture of shock, relief, and guilt flashing through them. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why did you bear this alone?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Because I didn't want you to feel trapped," she said. "You have your own life, your career, your responsibilities. I didn't want to be the burden that pulled you back." He shook his head, stepping closer, his voice raw. "A burden? Sam, you were never that. You were the one thing that made my life feel real." Her tears fell freely now. "Then why did you leave? Why did you disappear without a word?" Lee lowered his gaze. "I had to. I was assigned to a special mission overseas. It was dangerous, and I didn't know if I'd even come back alive. I thought staying away would protect you." The pain that had lingered in her chest for months suddenly softened. He hadn't left her because of indifference. He had left because he cared too much. The wind outside howled as if echoing her heart's cry. Lee reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. "I want to be here for you," he said quietly. "For both of you." Sam looked up at him, her lips trembling. "Are you sure? The road won't be easy. People will talk." He smiled faintly, squeezing her hand. "Let them talk. The only thing that matters is you and our child." In that small, dimly lit room, surrounded by the scent of wood smoke and winter air, Sam finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. Winter slowly gave way to spring, and with it came the quiet promise of new beginnings. The snow melted, revealing tiny green shoots breaking through the soil, fragile yet determined, much like Sam herself. Months had passed since that night, when she finally told Lee the truth. Since then, everything had changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, but softly. Like the morning sun rising after a long, cold night. Lee kept his word. He visited her often, helping with everything from repairing the old fence to cooking her favorite porridge when her morning sickness hit. Sometimes they didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer heavy with guilt or confusion, but filled with understanding and care. One afternoon, as the golden light filtered through the window, Lee sat beside Sam, resting his hand on her growing belly. "She kicked," she whispered, smiling. His eyes softened. "She's strong, just like her mother." Sam looked at him, emotion rising in her chest. "Lee, I used to be so scared. I thought I'd have to face everything alone. I didn't think I was worthy of a second chance." He took her hand gently. "You are more than worthy, Sam. You've been through storms most people can't even imagine, and still, you stand." Tears gathered in her eyes, but this time, they were not from pain. They were from gratitude. From the realization that her life, once filled with loss and uncertainty, was slowly turning into something precious. The day she gave birth was warm and full of light. The baby's first cry echoed in the small clinic room, and Lee, holding the tiny bundle in his arms, looked at to Sam with awe. "She's perfect," he said softly. To Sam smiled weakly, exhaustion and joy blending in her expression. "Her name will be Hope," she whispered, "because she's the reason I kept going." Lee looked at the baby and then back at her. "Hope," he repeated. "It's beautiful, just like her mother." Outside, the world was alive with color. Cherry blossoms dancing in the wind, sunlight spilling across the fields. Inside that small room, 3 hearts beat in quiet harmony. To Sam had once believed her story was over, that life had taken too much from her. But now, as she watched Lee cradle their daughter, she realized the truth. Sometimes, the most unexpected turns lead to the most beautiful destinations. And for the first time in a long time, too, Sam felt that her life was truly beginning. To Sam's story is not just about love or loss, it is about courage, forgiveness, and the quiet strength that grows when everything else falls apart. She began her journey as a single mother, carrying both pain and pride. When she discovered her pregnancy, fear nearly consumed her. But through her tears, she chose to face life, not with bitterness, but with hope. And that decision changed everything. From her, we learn that strength is not about never breaking, it's about learning how to heal and rebuild after the storm. To Sam didn't need anyone to save her. She saved herself first, by refusing to give up. Lee's return reminded us of another truth. Love is not proven by words, but by staying when it's hardest to stay. His support wasn't grand or perfect, it was quiet, patient, and real. Their story shows that even when life seems unfair, destiny has a way of bringing back what is meant for us, not always in the form we expect, but often in the way we need most. Sometimes life tests us not to break us, but to help us discover our own strength. Sometimes love leaves only to return when both hearts are ready. And sometimes, the most painful endings are just the beginning of something beautifully new.